Hi, I'm Kaushik Venkatraman. I head products in Consarc. I'm an accountant by profession and a technologist by passion. Never would I have dreamed that I'll be presenting to you from here. Here we are in London doing our first podcast. And we have a very, very special guest that we've invited over, and he's been gracious enough to accept this invitation. Nick Douglas, a global finance director in WPP worldwide, is a personality that you'd really, really want to learn and hear things from his end. So I'm really excited to present this episode, and I'm hoping that you get to understand not only the intricacies of what the profession entails, what automation entails, but you also get to know him a little better. Let's get on to the show. Good afternoon, Nick. It's an absolute pleasure having you here. I've been thinking about this for a while, but I know how devilish your calendar can be. So I take it as an absolute privilege for us to have you here. Thank you for coming. Yeah.
Okay.
To begin things with, if you can tell the listeners or viewers how what's been your journey to where you are in WPP today as a global finance director, and any interesting snippets on the way. If you can just give us a sense of how your journey has been, it would be great.
Sure. First off, big thanks for inviting me on your podcast.
Thank you.
I'm honoured to join you. We've known each other for many years now.
Yes.
So I guess I should say, really appreciate the support you and Consarc have given me on our journey together. And it's also a pleasure to join with your colleagues in Consarc in India. And you play a pretty crucial role, actually, in supporting us on a diverse range of projects. And I can recall the time that my colleague Olivia introduced us back in the day when we had our offices in Berkeley Square in Mayfair.
I agree, yes.
For me, it's been a pretty long and winding road to get to this position, and certainly not a journey that I had clearly mapped out from the start. I had a happy childhood living in St Albans, a small town near to London. I grew up in a family steeped in medicine rather than accountancy, which is an interesting fact. My mother was a nurse and my brother has subsequently become a GP.
Okay.
Quite a different world from finance. I'm one of two children and we attended perfectly ordinary primary schools. And then came the slightly more academically focused secondary school. I was pretty sporting back then, so I did a lot of cross-country and also played rugby in the earlier years. And from there, I took the Cambridge entrance exam and I successfully got into St John's College at Cambridge, where I chose to read economics and absolutely loved it. And to be fair, at that point, I imagined that I would probably go into an academic type career, and my tutors were certainly trying to push me in that direction. Unfortunately, in my intake of 11 that year, there were 11 economists at my college. 10 of us became accountants.
Okay.
So he wasn't very pleased with that. And the 11th went into stockbroking. So there were no academics amongst us. I actually looked at the Bank of England and I could have gone there, but I chose to go into accountancy, the world of professional services.
Yes.
And I've really been there ever since.
Okay.
I joined Arthur Andersen, and I think you know the story there.
Yes.
It was a great place to learn, certainly. They were a little bit different from the other firms. And I was there for four years. And during that time, I qualified as an accountant, but I also worked on some major projects in the Eastern Bloc as the markets there opened up, which were fascinating. So I spent some time in Poland, which was to do with the privatization of one of their tractor companies. I was working there with some Italians. And there was a bit of a language issue, although we had interpreters. The combination of Poles, Italians, and English people was probably not the best one. And I can remember the Italian representative there complaining about the standard of the coffee. And I think the words he used, which I remember even now, were, "Coffee here is strong but not tasty." And then also I spent some time in Prague, 5 weeks, working on the privatization of their previously nationalized electricity company. In fact, it was a combined power company that supplied power to the tower blocks in Prague. And then having spent 4 or 5 years at Arthur Andersen, I then began my journey into the world of commerce, and I ended up in a group role at Budget Rent-A-Car, which I did for about 4 years. But then I eventually landed at WPP, and that's really where my journey starts. And I've been at WPP now for just over 30 years. So
Wow.
it's a bit of a landmark. It's no secret at the time I joined, the company was in a pretty different state to what it is now. It had overstretched itself with some of the acquisitions that it had done, and the market at that time had gone into recession. So they did have to call upon their banks to bail them out, which they successfully did, and that was really interesting project work that I did at that time. And amongst the collection of agencies that they bought right at the start were JWT and Ogilvy and Mather, so some big landmark names in the advertising industry. And of course, it successfully got through the refinancing, and it developed over time into the business you see today. Over the years at WPP, it's been a constant evolution, and I've been part of that, I guess. I've worked in multiple roles across HQ, across different branches of finance, but I also spent some time in New York on Madison Avenue working from Y&R Advertising in a control role there.
Okay. Wow.
Which was incredibly interesting. And then I came back to London.
Okay.
And I would say, it's always been exciting, always been a learning journey. I think that's the most important thing when you embark on these careers, but also unpredictable and challenging from day to day. So I've been fortunate, really, to work alongside a brilliant and highly gifted group of colleagues throughout that period. And it's really their collective talent and dedication that makes WPP what it is.
That's really interesting, and congratulations on the 30 years. I didn't know that landmark, so I'm sure it must have been a fairly eventful experience, like you said. Given WPP's inorganic growth across the world, given that you have presence in more than 150 countries, given the sheer number of network agencies that are there, different cultures, different people, different languages, different time zones, as I say it sounds ominous and overwhelming. From your perspective, what would you consider as some of the biggest challenges that you faced in managing a group as big, complex, and diverse as WPP?
I think there's a lot of challenges in any multinational organisation, and I think that's really accentuated when you have an organisation that has grown by acquisition. You get a lot of complexity due to that. You have you have legacy structures and legacy systems and processes that really make your jobs much more challenging. And I think because we're global as well, we're in virtually every market of the world. We have 7 or 8 agencies in each different market. It's really difficult to manage through those cultural differences. And I would say the main lesson I've learned is that it's all about communication, and it's impossible to over communicate actually when things are that complex. Another complexity is really to do with the number of stakeholders around the organisation. We have lots of different agencies, and you have to be able to deal with all those different characters, both up through the organisation and around the organisation, and that's before you start talking about the people in other departments. So you can't just be a pure finance professional. You've really got to be able to have a good understanding of what the other areas do, for example, IT or the people teams, and you've really got to be able to relate to them on their own terms.
Understood. Okay, that's interesting. So, given the last, I would say, 10 years or so, with focus being a lot on automation, with AI being a hot topic, especially with the finance and controllership, what role do you see automation playing in streamlining, especially your day-to-day operations, in the way you'd want your finance teams to operate? So what role do you see automation play in that scheme of things?
I think automation is going to make an incredible difference. I think first off, it is actually impossible to underestimate what impact it will have on businesses like ours and individuals as we go forward. But it is also quite difficult to understand the precise impact. I think there will be technologies that come along that completely alter alter the way we do things from start to finish. But I think right now we don't quite see those. And I think in terms of our opportunity to apply technology internally, it's going to be more about assistance in the granular tasks that we do day to day. So I think there will be support at the transactional level, but also, most importantly, perhaps in the decision making.
Understood.
So I think, in terms of the data we get, it's going to enable us to consume much bigger quantities of data, but also to perform quicker analysis on that data and to run our models much faster. So I think it's going to be an adjunct to most of the tools that we already have, and it will improve efficiency. Clearly, at some point, it may lead to a reduction in jobs, but I don't think that's the primary opportunity here. I think the real opportunity is to get better at what we do.
Oh, yes.
Through the use of technology. And then it's really on us to learn about the technology. And I think, in terms of our people, I think the youngsters have an advantage there because they come in with probably a more flexible mindset, but also they're better at the newer technologies. They know what's out there. They're used to applying it as it comes along. So I think it's really important that we encourage the younger members of the team to share those ideas and opportunities, because this thing is going to evolve over time and it's going to happen really fast. And if we don't do it, our competitors will. So it's a pretty fundamental thing to the way we do business going forward.
Okay. I mean, I completely resonate with that, because even in Consarc, the core technology team is actually driven by accountants who also write lines of code, who can also work with newer technologies and come up with functionalities and features which accountants will probably be empathetic with. And they are the younger talent, right? And they're coming with such diverse skill sets. It's quite encouraging and pleasant to deal with that kind of a wider array of skill sets that they're coming. Definitely finance professionals are getting a lot more techno-functional. So I think that's a great trend to work with, and I completely agree and resonate with you on that. Given WPPs, like you said, when you beautifully put it across, saying, different cultural teams from different cultural backgrounds, you can never over-communicate, in the organization or around the organization. From a leadership and team dynamics perspective, I know you've handled people from, I keep losing count of the number of countries, where teams keep reporting to you and the kind of conversations that you keep having. So from a leadership and team dynamics perspective, what are some of the strategies that you use to lead such an incredibly diverse team, which come from so many different countries? So any insights on that would be, very unique, especially given the organization structure of WPP.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question. I think it's one of the biggest challenges that we face at the center of a global organization. We have a large number of financial professionals, a lot of whom are in the US and UK and mature markets, but also we have a lot of finance teams distributed around the world. So that is a challenge. Language can be a challenge, and of course time zones as well. But I think for me it begins and ends with the people. We can only be successful if we are good leaders of our teams. And I believe in terms of my personal style, it's all about being visible and accessible, and try to be a champion as far as you can for your team, and setting the values and trying to adhere to those as best you can. And it is incredibly challenging as the industry goes through, what are some pretty significant changes, and there's an evolution going on as we modernize our processes as well, and that's a journey, and that journey is one that our people have to go through as well. So I think it's about fostering a sense of shared purpose, and demonstrating that we're all in this together, and helping. And the reason we're doing this is to help improve the business, but most importantly ourselves, because I think everyone will get something out of this if they do it right. So really, I want to inspire, and get them to see the bigger picture, and see how their individual contributions will fit into the overall success of the business, and then how their work makes a tangible difference. In practical terms, what does that mean? Well, we have a lot of global meetings. I spend I think once a month we meet with the senior finance community, and then the CFO also has global finance town halls, and I think the messaging that comes out of those meetings is pretty critical. But we also rely on the people around us. So we have a structure where the other finance leaders out in the operating companies or agencies, as we call them, as long as they've got the same message as us, then generally the messages will find their way down to the ground in terms of finance.
Great. I mean, with respect to variance analysis and commentary, we did have a module, which we started with as part of our finance close, which we brought to you, in terms of deploying it as a possible solution with obviously customizations that will help you out deliver the kind of outcome that you were looking at. I think commentary application from our perspective is something which we realized, controllers really want to have a grip on the underlying variances. They want to understand, what kind of strategic insights or explanations the users from the finance team can gather and can, pass that information on for business consumption, whether it's to the CFO's office or CEO's office. So we realized the outcome or the benefits of this application are a lot. And that's when we started this module, and coincidentally around the same time is when you had said that you were looking for something similar, and that's when we built the full stack enterprise version of the entire commentary application or the variance analysis application, and WPP ended up being one of the use cases for that application as well. So given this context, what I would really like to ask is, from a commentary perspective or from an automation standpoint, for a group as diverse as WPP, how do you look at this solution delivering the kind of benefits from your perspective, whether it's in terms of users who are going to be using the application to input information, or from a review and a monitoring perspective? How do you look at this as a solution that's going to deliver the kind of outcomes that you'd want it to deliver?
I think that companies like Consarc play a really important role in steering us along, helping steer us along the journey of modernisation and automation. Right now, as I've already spoken to, we're a very complex organisation. We rely on a lot of manual processes, and our journey involves reducing the manual processes, which come with inherent issues. They create errors. People get bogged down in them. It relies on individuals. We want to get to a point where we have, automation throughout the business, and I think that gives you massive advantages in terms of the reliability of the reporting, and also, one of the most important things now is the control environment.
Yes.
And it gives us a major step up there. So we can do a lot of this on our own, but I think it's really important to go to market, to get options in terms of understanding what best practice is, and I think the specialised expertise that subject matter experts like Consarc and other firms of consultants has a place in the business. True. It's not for everything, but I think the ideas that they can bring and the external perspective can be invaluable given the challenges that we face in our environment. And specifically, I think the areas that we've been looking for support on here are process standardization, helping us to understand our existing process and identify areas for improvement, and develop those standardized practices across the group, incorporating best practice and hopefully moving to general best practice over time, using experience from other clients. Technology implementation and selection, that's incredibly important as well. Yes. So that we choose the best tools, and there is an array of tools out there in the marketplace. So, we already use some of those in the business, but it's also good to know what else is out there, and helping us with change management, I guess, is the other thing.
Great. Okay. We've just completed our first phase of implementation, with respect to, what we're doing on the variance analysis module of what Consarc offers. Personally, for us, I keep talking to my team with respect to their experience of, working with your team as well. It's been quite satisfying and quite fun, honestly, to work with your team, especially with guidance that we've been getting from the SteerCo. The kind of support that we've been getting from the key stakeholders, whether it's from IT or IT ops assurance, or whether it's from risk and assurance, the kind of support that we've got, the kind of agility that we've had on overcoming those hurdles as and when we are kind of maturing the whole solution. It's been quite pleasant, quite fun. had interesting debates as well within the team. I might say, and in that sense, it's been an exhilarating experience for us for sure. But from your perspective, right, what do you think some of our team's highlights were, in terms of challenges or low points, during this implementation, when we were trying to, deploy it, get users to accept it, create some sense of awareness about the solution, etc. So what do you think were some of the challenges or high points that you had, experienced or you perceived from your standpoint?
First off, I think you've actually implemented 2 tools for us.
Oh, yes.
One of them was relatively straightforward. Perhaps we'd see that as a dry run for the other. But, both tools, once they're fully implemented, will be incredibly valuable. So that first tool, we call it the Stat Accounts Tracker. We didn't have any mechanism for tracking the status of our stats across the globe. We now have that. It's up and running. And it gives us complete visibility into where we are on that filing process, which is particularly important as we go through an audit transition, so that we can hopefully ensure a smooth and orderly handover to our new auditors. There were pitfalls along the way, but I would say, the actual tool itself pretty much worked as intended from the start. I think where there were issues, it was because we hadn't really thought through the spec of that tool at the beginning. As I say, it was a simpler tool. It didn't quite have the same control implications that the other tool, which we'll come on to, did have, and which has meant that there have been multiple stakeholders included. And I think you've probably been very polite about the whole process because it was very, very demanding on all of us as we went through that journey. So I think in terms of the commentary tool, again, I would say, if we had clearly defined at the start what it was we were trying to achieve, it would have been much easier. It essentially evolved, it morphed from a tool that was meant to do one thing to much more of a controls-focused tool by the end. And of course, if we'd known that it was going to be, the primary focus was going to be on controls, then we would really have had, I think, a much bigger pause before we got onto the implementation, because it's incredibly important for SOX, our owning internal controls purposes, and the external auditors. It's a tool that's absolute. The success of that tool is absolutely fundamental to the operation of our internal control environment. So we have to get it right, and we are on a journey to getting it right, and I'm confident we will, and as you said, it's stage 1.
Yes.
There will be a stage 2, and then probably a stage 3, and I think it's about teamwork too, isn't it? That,
True.
You've learnt how difficult it can be to operate in a global, multinational environment where you have all these different stakeholders. And I know, you're not helped by time difference either, because you're in India, and then you've got some of us in the UK, some of us in the US, and everyone coming at it from a different angle.
True.
And it's really difficult to navigate when you're coming at it from the outside.
True.
So I think that was a bit of a learning curve, probably for you. But I think you had the trust and confidence, certainly amongst the finance team, right from the start, because we already had worked with you on other projects. And then over time, I think that confidence has come from the other stakeholders that you mentioned, across the other functions like IT and various other departments. So it's been a great project, actually. And once it's up and running, I know it's going to transform the way we do things in that space.
Yes, and I'm sure we'll also end up, doing that together as we are doing it right now.
Yep.
Just to take a couple of steps back, I do remember going through this, and that was one of the fun part of pitching in for this project in the first place. WPP as a group did invite bids from quite a few solution providers, and we also threw our hat in the ring in terms of you gave us the opportunity for us to throw our hat in the ring, and let me add it that way. At that point in time, do you have a couple of critical factors which you were looking out from a solution provider's perspective, and when you were going through the selection process? If you can take us through that journey at that point in time, how this whole thing evolved in your mind, it would be really, really helpful.
Yeah, sure. I mean, for a project of of this size and this importance, we did go through a pretty rigorous vendor selection process, and I think one of the challenges was to get you onto our preferred supplier list,
Yes.
which I think we have duly achieved that.
Yes.
But there was some skepticism at the start around the choice of a smaller firm
Yes.
in India who not too many people had heard of. But I think one advantage you had was that some of us in the finance area had already worked with you on some of your advisory work and projects for us in some of the markets. So, it was a genuine pitch process. We did have quite a lot of different firms vying for the opportunity to take on the work. Some in the UK and others in different markets. But I think in terms of our decision making, I would say the primary factor in my mind, and I was only one of the decision makers, but I think the others came to share that, was really the investment that you were prepared to make in the client relationship. And I think in that pitch process, we saw that you had taken the time to understand, try to understand our specific needs, successfully understand, I should also say, and tailoring your solutions example. So it felt like a partnership, which was kind of the feel that I had when you were doing the work in the other areas for us, but you certainly demonstrated it as part of that pitch. And I think you were honest and transparent through the pitch process. You were able to highlight some of the difficulties that would have to be overcome in a way that some of the others perhaps didn't. And I think candor is particularly important when we go through these things. And then the other factor I felt was that you actually grabbed hold of some of the data on us. It wasn't sensitive data, but you turned that into a working model to show how this would work as part of standing up the tool. And I think that also separated you from some of the others who didn't do that live demo. And then finally, of course, value for money. It's not about being cheapest. It's about giving us the best value for the money we're spending, because we have to choose where the money goes. And I think, in the case of your offer, it was a pretty compelling offer, and it also offered us, a good return on the money that we were going to spend. So, it was a rigorous decision process, and I think we chose the right supplier.
Thank you.
Based on where we are now.
In retrospect, yes, thank you. But I think we've spoken a lot about our domain, our work, our day-to-day professional requirements, and the demands that it kind of draws out of us on a day in and day out basis. So I'd like to slightly shift to a probably more a lighter topic or a set of questions that I might have. And when you gave an introduction about yourself, you said you did indulge pretty heavily in sports, whether it's cross country or running. And I remember one of our earlier conversations, we used to talk about, how much you're doing today and how much I'm doing today. And I went back home feeling a little guilty, looking at you as an inspiration. So if I were to kind of, go into that direction, what do you do to disconnect from work? And often we keep, and especially for you with different time zones, etc., I'm sure you must be finding it difficult to disconnect from work and then, go and try to recharge yourself in some fashion or the other. So in that kind of a demanding role, especially when it demands so much out of you from a time perspective, what do you do to disconnect from work?
No, I think that's a great question, because the reality is for people in these senior global roles, you are pretty much always on. So it can be difficult to switch off from the requirements of the job. You have people in the US, so into the evening you're still having to work, and in the morning you've got a bulging inbox from people in Asia. So it's tough juggling all the demands of the role. But I think disconnecting is pretty crucial, in order to achieve well-being and de-stress. Actually, I think that's vital. To be sharp at work, I think you do have to find a way of taking yourself away from that environment. And I think the benefit that also gives you is that in that downtime, just gives you a bit of a chance to reflect, perhaps, and think through some of the bigger decisions that otherwise you might not have time to do. And I always find that if I sleep on a big decision, you end up with a much clearer thought process the
Okay.
next day if you can afford yourself that time. But anyway, being specific, for me, it's quite a lot of time spent being active. So I find a way of getting up early before the day starts for some others, taking the dogs for a walk, and clearing the head. Walking my wife, and it's really our catch-up time at that time of day. And beyond that, find time to spend with the family. My wife and I have 5 boys between us. They're all a bit older now. They're all in London. Well, 4 of them are in London, and the other is in Paris. So we have the 4 around, and we try and see them at weekends when we can. Reading and also listening to podcasts. And maybe your series of podcasts will be on that list. I don't know.
Yes, hopefully.
But in terms of sports, it has to be soccer and cricket and rugby.
Okay, good. And if you were to give any 1 or 2 surprising facts about your passion and hobby that you follow, which not many people would know, who you work with, would know. The reason I asked that question, just to give you a bit of a background, the last time I had come down to London and we had gone out on a team dinner with some of your colleagues, we got to know facets of them which we would otherwise have not known at all, because those don't happen on Teams calls, right? That happens over a good, informal, casual dinner. So I'm interested and curious as well to see if there's some hidden gems out there from your side, which not many of your colleagues would know about you, with regards to especially, how you disconnect from work in that context.
I don't think there's too many secrets, but I was a runner when I was younger, so I don't run anymore because I have bad knees. I think they know that I have 5 boys, and between my wife and I, we have 5 boys, and that takes up a lot of time. I do have a secret football club who play non-league, and so I'm pretty passionate about them.
Okay.
They play in the conference. They've gone up into the league a few times. They always seem to come back down. They're called Barnet. And I started seeing them about 50 years ago with my dad. So
nice.
I'm incredibly passionate about some areas of sport. And I also have a secret podcast that my boys always go crazy about because I'm always talking about it, which is Prof G. So that's a tip for his podcast. He's a media guy and an entrepreneur, and he's about my age, so he's
nice.
Good, interesting podcast.
Great. I'm sure I'll keep that in mind to follow for sure. Just to kind of take a slightly wider lens about our profession, our community, the finance professionals, the finance community as a whole. A lot of times I keep getting feedback, okay, you're an accountant. For people outside of the accounting world, I keep getting feedback, hey, you're an accountant, okay, which means you're dealing with numbers, rules. Doesn't it get a little dreary? Doesn't it get a little, tedious, if I may say so? If I were being polite about it as much as I can, even though the words are a lot more crude than that. What factors, how would you look at it? And are there any interesting anecdotes or any interesting episodes or incidents, which you kind of can share to kind of say there is a fun part to there's a fun side to our profession as well. Is there anything that you can share so that our listeners can kind of, know that it's not as boring as it seems to be from outside?
We do get a bad rap, don't we? People think all we do is worry about numbers and our heads are buried in spreadsheets, and that we probably do our own tax returns on time. Well, none of that's true, is it? I think, it's much more than the numbers, isn't it? That's the basic. That's a given that you can pick up a spreadsheet and kind of understand what it is showing you. It's all about the analysis, and it's all about being able to stand back from it. And it's all about trying to add value in other ways, So it's generally much more strategic than that. I think, once AI does come in, I think that will offer us opportunities to move much more in that direction. So it's also about communication, and as you go higher up in finance, it's also about the leadership skills that you build up. I think the good thing about being in finance is that it's a really diverse job, and you can go into all these different areas of finance, and if when you're younger you become a qualified accountant, it's a great start. You can pretty much go anywhere.
True.
You don't even have to stick in finance. It can lead you into becoming a business leader or banking or all the other worlds that you could go into. I can tell you specifically in my role, I have done some really interesting things. I already mentioned the project work that I did in Czech Republic and Poland when I was much younger, but I've been involved in court cases. I've sat in courtrooms till late at night, with arbitrators expecting no outcome, and then eventually you get an outcome, and then it's all about the celebration, and it's a huge, it's a real good feeling when you get a good commercial outcome for the company. Obviously it's a late night, but you don't mind that. And then it's the buzz of being in a team, in an environment where it's all about delivering the numbers and it's year end and you're working all hours, and then that sense of relief once the numbers go out at 2 a.m, and then you can stagger into bed and up again early the next day.
Yes.
It can be really, really interesting and exciting.
True. And I think I completely agree with you, especially on the fact that you said finance is probably just a starting point to understand businesses, understand how they operate, understand how they function. And even interestingly, we are seeing a trend of CFOs starting to dawn up a lot more CEO kind of roles, starting to take up responsibilities to shadow the CEO's office as well across companies. And CFOs are given a more strategic initiative to kind of look at business from the color of a different lens. So I think I completely understand. Finance is probably a great pedestal to begin things with, but if anyone's interested about running a business, I think there's a great starting point. I think that's a very valuable insight that you gave on the profession as a whole. So now to slightly shift to a forward-looking kind of, to kind of come to the last section of this podcast, trying to be a little more forward-looking. What trends are you seeing with respect to the accounting profession, especially in large organizations like WPP? I know we spoke automation, but there's also questions surrounding, how much will automation disrupt, or is it as disruptive as it's made out to be at this juncture? Is it still so? Any kind of thoughts that you have, or how do you look at how the future of this profession is going to change, especially given your rich history that you've had? How do you see the future of the accounting profession going forward?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question, isn't it? Because the accounting profession has never stood still. We've had new technologies come along either gradually or in waves, and right now it's AI. We had the internet come in. I can remember when I started work, I don't think I had a laptop for a year, and then email just about came in, and massive technological advantages that everyone thinks will completely disrupt and change the way they do things. I think the reality is, we'll change the way we do things at the edges, at least to start with, and it's on all of us to embrace that, and learn and make sure that we pick it up, because it's not a threat, it's an opportunity. AI is not a threat; it's the people who understand AI. If you don't, so it's up to you to embrace it. So apart from the technology, which is obviously out there, I think, it's becoming an ever more complex environment for us to operate in as finance people. We're surrounded by regulation and compliance, and ESG is a whole new area we didn't have before, and that's evolving at pace. And each market or set of markets, in the case of the EU, is coming up with its own legislation, and I think there is gradually becoming an alignment, and for us as a UK company, we have not just the UK rules that we need to adhere to, but also the EU rules and the US rules. And I think for finance, it's really, an opportunity for us, because we have the best systems traditionally to gather this information. We will remain core in it, and we also have the infrastructure as well, and maybe some of the other teams don't. So, we have to face into that, the increasing regulation. Internal controls, it's in everything we do. It's not optional. It's grown massively in terms of over the last few years, and it's up to all of us to pick that up and really understand what it's about. Not just apply it to the letter, but focus on risk and make sure that we do a proper risk assessment and bake that into all of the work we do. Remembering that it's all about the documentation. If you haven't documented it, you haven't done it. And I think for our finance teams, it's a lot of extra work. It's an extra day job, isn't it?
Yes.
For most people, and they have to fit it in aside. alongside all the other work they do. So that's one of the big challenges, I think, facing all of us. Greater reliance on systems and data, the old manual processes in this new world of rigorous controls, they just don't stand up. So I think it's up to us to bring in better systems over time. And then business acumen and strategic thinking, which I think links into what you said about the journey of the CFO, and the CFO now needing to be much closer to the CEO. They need to be the CEO's business partner and really help them setting the agenda for the company. And I think it's on all of us throughout the organisation to try and think in the same way and make sure that there's enough space in our day jobs to think outside the box, and try and help our companies as they develop.
Okay. Specifically touching on AI, given that it's kind of it's been the hot topic for the last couple of years, and the way it's evolved significantly, right, since inception. Even as recently as I think a couple of days back, we saw a release where WPP using AI was able to engage with Amazon in terms of a contract that came out in a public release. So stepping back a bit, or stepping away from the accounting profession, how do you personally see AI impacting media and advertising business, and what is your take on how disruptive AI is going to be, especially in this business?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the big question at the moment. I think there's no way you can ignore it. We're not ignoring it. Our competitors are not ignoring it, and certainly our clients are expecting us to embrace the new technology. So I think, we've been making investments into that space over the last few years, and I think we're now at a really exciting stage of that journey, and we've got products that we can talk to clients with, that our people are using and embracing, and I think embedding it into the client offer is really what it's about. Clients want a single unified offer that combines data, technology, and the best of the marketing services that you can offer around the organisation. And I think having one unified platform, which is what our open AI platform is aimed at, which is designed to be used by all of our people, whether they be client-facing or back office, and it's designed to be used by them all of the time. And there was one statistic that we quoted in the last release, which is that the usage of that is up 107% since the start of the year. So the idea is get it onto everyone's desk, get them using it all the time, and it will become a real productivity tool internally, but also a way of giving a better service to clients, to bring all of our offer together. And they expect it, and I think, as you said, you pointed to Amazon, which was a big new win recently.
Yes.
It was a big factor in that win, and we're really, really pleased with the success of that. And, we're looking forward to some more Amazons.
Yes, I'm sure you will get cracking on that for sure. And probably the last question for the podcast is, for young aspiring students who are probably evaluating professions, what would be those words of wisdom that you'd like to give them, especially when they want to kind of look at this profession from a sense of ambition, that they want to grow into a leadership position going forward as they progress in their careers? What would be the advice that you'd give to aspiring accountants?
I can give a few bits of advice from my long time at WPP. I think it's really important to do a job that you find interesting. If you don't enjoy it, then it probably means that it's time for you to look somewhere else. I think it's important to be inquisitive and try and get under the cover of whatever you're doing. And it's up to you, really, to constantly seek out new challenges. I think I'd also suggest that time spent on self-improvement is time really well invested. And the younger you can do that, the better, because that will give you all the opportunity to learn from that education that you've been giving yourself when you're young.
Understood.
If you have the opportunity to find mentors within your organisation or even outside of work, that's really important. And in fact, I think the outside of work point is a really good one. If you've got a group of people that can act as your advisors when there's tough stuff going on at work, that's a great way of doing it, and they will, if they're as part of your friendship group, give you proper independent advice. And then finally, see failure as an opportunity. Yeah. Try things. You're not going to get everything right. it's an opportunity. Just make sure you learn from it, and also make sure that you're aware of the early signs of failure. But don't be afraid to fail. Nobody gets everything right all the time. I think there's a few important
Yes, and
messages
I think
there.
that the last one was a fairly powerful. The last bit of advice on failure that you said is a fairly powerful message. To look at it as an opportunity, and I think that's a very critical point that probably youngsters need to really listen to and look at life as an aspect, just not your profession, but look at life as an aspect. Where if you fail, it's probably you get to learn yourself a little better, you get to know yourself a little better, and I think it's during conflicts we tend to see inside, and we tend to go in towards ourselves and see what do we know better about ourselves. And I think failure is an opportunity for us to know ourselves, and I think that's quite a powerful message. And on that note, I think I will come to a sense of conclusion on this podcast. It's been, as usual, an absolute privilege talking to you. I'm sure I'll continue to love engaging dialogues with you and conversations with you. Tough ones, I'm sure, are on its way in the next couple of months, which I'm looking forward to. But nevertheless, it's still inspiring. It's still fun. I think I keep telling my team, look at it as something which you'll never get to experience. And I think that's the whole fun part of working with you, especially you, your team, and WPP as a whole. So thanks a lot, Nick, for your time. And thanks for making it. And I don't have any more words to express our gratitude. Thank you.
And from me, thanks very much for inviting me. And I hope you find some of this interesting.
Sure. Thanks a lot. Thank you, Nick.
Okay.
Thank
Thanks.
you. Yes.